Support from True Leaf Market is helping to keep On the Ledge thriving and growing. True Leaf Market are the indoor and outdoor growing experts, chosen by more than 500,000 customers for their seed and gardening needs. True Leaf Market offers a great range of plant seeds, from houseplants like the polka dot plant and the asparagus fern, to vegetables and flowers to grow in the garden. And when it comes to kits for growing microgreens, wheatgrass and sprouting seeds, True Leaf Market's range of starter kits will provide everything you need to get started. And all their products come with a 30-day satisfaction guarantee, so I know you won't be disappointed. US listeners, you can get 10% off your first purchase at trueleafmarket.com now using the offer code ONTheLedge. So go to trueleafmarket.com and enter the offer code ONTheLedge for 10% off. True Leaf Market, bringing the seed you need. Welcome to On the Ledge podcast. I am your host, Jane Perrone, and this is your audio guide to the world of indoor leafiness, that is, On the Ledge. Thanks for your fantastic response to the 100th episode. Yes, it made us cry. Yes, it made us laugh. And everybody seems to have really had fun with it. And for me personally, it was a huge boost just to know how much everyone loves the show. And it's spurring me on to make more episodes. So thank you, everybody, for your support. But now it's back to business as usual with a regular episode, and this one I'm devoting to the ubiquitous, the indestructible, well, we'll discuss that later, and the cheap as chips spider plant, yes, Chlorophytum comosum. And I'm answering a question about a begonia in which we slip in the term removing apical dominance. Yes, that's something you can slip into conversation at your next oh so stylish dinner party. A shout out to my new Patreon subscribers this week. Jan and Naomi became crazy plant people, while Jane, Violetta, Locke and Andrew all became legends. Thank you to all of you, and if you want to join the On the Ledge Patreon community, then check out the show notes to find out how. When I put a tweet out a few months ago asking for your spider plant tales, I got a fantastic response from all kinds of people who love and cherish their spider plants. Badger Mash wrote, I have what I'm fairly sure is technically still the same spider plant that I rescued from the top of a gently smoking bonfire on a frosty morning in 1978. Well, what a start to a story about a spider plant. Of course, I asked Badger Mash for more information, and nonchalantly they replied, there really isn't much to it. I think it was February. I was out walking and someone had been not very successfully burning leaves. On the top of the heap was a rather sad-looking spider plant. I took it home, potted it, and after countless repottings, it's still here. So thank you, Badger Mash, for sharing that tale of the abandoned spider plant which found a new home with you. Linda Smith told me about looking after the school greenhouse as an O-level student in the mid-1970s. And she tweeted, when the school relocated last year, I was lucky enough to get a couple of plants. I like to think they're descendants of the plants I tended all those years ago. And in fact, this reminded me of my own school spider plant story, which was, and I think I have mentioned this on the show before, that I got let out of class with my friend Ruth to go and water the spider plants in the school library every week. It's probably why I'm not very good at maths, because I missed so much class. But the spider plants in question were those kind of really miserable spider plants that you used to see, not so much anymore perhaps, that were kind of almost yellow with neglect and very, very underwatered, but we did our best to keep them alive, and keep them alive we did. And the wonderful thing about spider plants is they are so adaptable to a range of different conditions. Marna Lister got in touch on Twitter to tell me about spider plants growing outdoors in Sacramento, California. Low temperatures 28 Fahrenheit in winter, 110 Fahrenheit in summer. They're growing profusely in front of a house and have even sneaked around to the side yard. And Mana managed to take a stem of babies, and looks like there were plenty there to draw on. Anna Omiatek Tot told me about her mum's spider plant, which has been there as long as she can remember. And she had taken some babies from that plant to live with her. And it's at least 50 years old and indestructible. There's more Chlorophytum Twitter tales to come. But for now, let's look a bit deeper into the world of Chlorophytum comosum, because there are several different cultivars of spider plant to collect. Let's have a look at them. Of course, when we say Chlorophytum comosum, we really mean the plain green spider plant, which, although it's had a bit of a burst of popularity in recent years, is definitely less popular than Chlorophytum comosum variegatum, the classic white and green variegation with a white stripe down the centre of a green leaf. But don't dismiss the plain green Chlorophytum altogether. There is a rather nice new cultivar called Lemon, which has pale lemony lime green leaves, which is nice if you like that kind of thing. Imagine a kind of Chlorophytum comosum version of neon pothos, and you won't be far off. And if you want to mix up the variegation, there's also the variegated cultivar Vitatum, where the green leaves have white margins and a green stripe down the centre. So in other words, an exact reverse of variegatum. So it's nice to have these next to each other and you can look at the contrasting patterns. One thing to say though is because Vitatum has less green than variegatum, it's just got that green stripe down the centre, the overall surface area of green is less, and therefore it can be a slightly less vigorous plant because those cream or white parts of the leaf don't have any chlorophyll, can't photosynthesize, therefore the plant has less area to make its food and energy. So bear that in mind. If you're growing a Vitatum, it might need a bit more care and attention than a regular variegatum. The other super popular cultivar of the moment has various names, but it's basically a curly spider plant. So variegatum, but the leaves look a bit more like a ponytail palm in that they're kind of curly and wavy. Again, I'm not a great fan of this because I just think it looks like it's been attacked by a pest and gone a bit poorly. But it is proving popular. There's a cultivar called Bonnie which has curly leaves, which seems to be the main one available, and it's quite compact as well. So if you're looking for a more compact spider plant, this is one to go for if you like the curly leaves. If you like a compact plant but you're not keen on the curly leaves, then there's one called Ocean, which is definitely worth a look. Like comosum Vitatum, this one has a green stripe down the centre, but the white margins are much narrower, so overall the plant has less white than it does green. The leaves are a bit wider and thicker, and it's overall a more compact plant. That won't get really massive like the classic Chlorophytum comosum variegatum specimens that you might have seen in huge hanging baskets. This one will stay quite neat and small. Now it's worth mentioning that of course the Chlorophytum genus is wider than just the species Chlorophytum comosum. So as we've talked about in previous episodes, there are a few hardy members of the Chlorophytum clan like Chlorophytum saundersii, and I'll put some links to those into the show notes. But they're not really the topic for this particular podcast because we're going to focus on comosum. So once you've got your Vitatum, your variegatum, your Ocean, how in the heck do you look after these plants? I sought out Chlorophytum comosum fan Daryl Cheng for a chat. And I started out by asking him what it is about this plant that really floats his boat.
Their structure is just so appealing in that it's just like a nice little bush that fans out at a nice, beautiful arc. You know, they have a nice curvature to them, and they're generally quite full in terms of being very dense.
But Daryl's not that keen on the term easy when it comes to any houseplant, let alone spider plants.
Whenever we talk about something being easy to care for, that word easy contains like so many both subjective and objective criteria, right? And so some of the things that are subjective, which are like, oh, it's mine has brown tips, or it's kind of floppy, or it's kind of faded, and these things are kind of like the ease of which it is to take care of the plant really depends on your tolerance for these visible imperfections, right?
So, like any plant, your spider plant may not look Instagram perfect at all times. But the key to its care is, as with so many plants, the right light levels. This South African native plant needs the old classic of bright indirect light. Well, at least that's what all the books say. But if you're trying to replicate that into your own home, the best spot might be a really nice big skylight, as Daryl Cheng found out.
There's a few pictures that I've taken at my new church where I essentially had to rescue a whole slew of spider plants. Unfortunately, they weren't quite cared for all that well. And so what I did was I gave them a little repotting, and it just so happens that the church had a really beautiful skylight, like right in the middle. And so I just moved all their spider plants there, and I have good photographic records of them since. Well, this by now it would have been September 2018 that I rescued them, and when I took a photo of them later on in like January, these plants just really sprang back up and doing beautifully because of those skylights.
If you don't have a skylight, then try your spider plants in a nice, large east or west facing window. It doesn't want to be baked by the midday sun, but at the same time, sticking it in a dark corner will leave it very pale and limp, just like those school library chlorophytums I told you about. And when it comes to water, one of the great qualities of the spider plant is that its fat white rhizomes are very good at storing water, so it can survive for quite a long time without much in the way of a drink. That said though, in the growing season, it will benefit from a decent glug of water every week. Just make sure that the compost that you use is free draining so those rhizomes don't get soggy and wet. Because, as is often the case, plants can recover better from being too dry than from being waterlogged. And spider plants do, of course, have a tough as old boots reputation, as Daryl explains.
The spider plant is an extremely resilient plant, meaning that I've seen that. Well, I mean, the ones that I did at the church, they've revived from being completely wilted and spring right back up. And they actually have what I would call like several signs of showing the sort of status, the water status of the plant. Like obviously the first is like that it's fully watered, which is that leaves are nice and bouncy. If you look at the plant and it doesn't seem as green as it was before, then it's starting to get quite dry. And of course, at that point, the soil is also very dry.
Do spider plants like to be root bound? It's a myth that's often passed around, but is it true? Daryl, of course, has a view.
One time I went to my favorite nursery, and the owner took me to the back and showed me the stock plant. And this is a really amazing kind of thing, because you normally see a spider plant, the biggest basket is probably 12 inches, maybe 14 at the biggest, right? And here I got to see a spider plant. It must have been it must have been a bucket of maybe almost 24 inches across, and just like spewing out, like it must have been hundreds of babies on this single plant. And he's told me that this is the plant they use to produce all their spider plant stock. And he said the trick with getting the lots of babies is obviously, yes, the right light, but the next thing is that the roots need to be a little bit cramped. And if I put on my like evolutionary biology caps and think about this, then it would make sense that the plant would decide to propagate itself by sending out the babies rather than underground rhizomes, to make more leaves for itself when it realizes that it's running out of room in the current space.
More on spider plants' prodigious baby-making abilities in part 2, but now let's hear from our second sponsor. For For me, the hardest thing about learning a new language as an adult is finding the time in my week to get out to a language learning class. And that's where Babbel comes in. Babbel is the language learning app that gets you speaking a new language with confidence. You can choose from 14 different languages, including Spanish, French and Polish, and Babbel is designed to get you speaking your new language with ease, super quickly. The convenient lessons are just 10 to 15 minutes long and you can do them anywhere. You'll learn through interactive dialogues and speech recognition technology so you can perfect your pronunciation and accent. And the good news is you can try Babbel for free with On The Ledge podcast. Go to babbel.com or download the app and try it for free. That's Babbel, Babbel.com, or download the app to try for free. Babbel, speak a new language with confidence. And now let's talk about making babies the spider plant way. Lots of people refer to the little stems with plantlets at the end as stolons or runner, but actually, more accurately, they should be described as inflorescences. And an inflorescence is basically just a bunch of flowers on a stem. In the case of Chlorophytum comosum, that inflorescence is on the end of a very long stem, and once it's flowered, tiny plantlets develop. And gradually, as they grow, their weight will bring them into contact with the soil, where as the stem bends down and touches. And then in nature, that will develop into a new plant. And generally, when they're grown in the house, they tend to produce a lot more of these stems than they do in the wild. It's quite nice to leave them on and let the plant grow a chandelier-like appearance. But if you do want to take some off to cultivate, there are many different ways of doing it. Twisting or snipping off the plantlets and potting them up into some gritty compost is one way of doing things. I've also seen people snip them off and then water propagate. One of the more foolproof ways is to peg down a stem into a separate pot of gritty potting mix with something like a paperclip that you've unfurled to make a U shape, or if you want to get fancy you can buy some florist's pins from your nearest florist and then just wait until that roots, and then at that point you can cut the main stem off. Whichever technique you choose, it is ridiculously easy to make more spider plants, and that's probably why these plants are so very popular and so ubiquitous. One of the other tweets I received when I put my call out for spider plant stories came from Quanzone, who said, "Stacked all my potted trees, bulbs, plants together on an irrigation tube in my conservatory with spider plants hanging overhead. Came home 3 months later to find every spare dot of soil colonised by a baby spider plant." While Artsy Herbivore told me about the spider plant that's thriving in her west-facing bathroom, and she says babies and flowers just keep producing throughout the year. We won't be able to get in the bathroom soon. Oh, that sounds like it's getting serious, Claire. If your spider plant isn't producing any babies, there's probably a few reasons why. Young plants won't produce inflorescences, so it may be if you do have a young plant that it just needs to grow up a little bit before it's ready for the responsibility of parenthood. And the other reason is the plant just isn't happy enough to think about reproducing. You may need to increase the water, feed, put it in a brighter spot, and hopefully you will start to see some inflorescences developing. There is one common problem that spider plant owners experience, and that's brown tips on the leaves. Here's Daryl's take on the matter.
Let me take it this way. When we have children and something happens, we have what are called like teaching moments, right? Where here's a moment that we can use to teach them a life lesson about something, right? Is it me, or is plant care completely devoid of that kind of thinking? So here I'm going to say that the brown tips thing, I would rather call it a teaching moment than something that you can do to avoid it. Actually, but you know what? If we do want to avoid it, the newest leaves will be perfectly, brown tip. It'll be a perfect like virgin tip, if you will. I'm looking at one of my spider plants right now, the youngest one, and all of its tips are very nice and sharp, not a single brown tip in sight. And then I look behind me to those mother spider plants, which have been here for several months, and nearly all the tips are brown. And if we just want to know the physical explanation of why this happens, it's usually because of fluoride toxicity or I've also read boron toxicity. And the way that nurseries avoid this is they have to treat their water with different chemicals to make sure that these chemicals are sort of neutralized so they don't affect the tips of these plants. And of course, they're doing that only because commercially they know that people have some aversion to these brown tips, so they try and avoid it, right? But when you're owning a plant, at home, I really don't see a need for this sort of level of perfection. So, I don't go wasting distilled water on my plants. I just use whatever I have in the tap. And the thing is, most city water is fluoridated for the purpose of, helping our teeth or something like that. And so, I just accept whatever fluoride damage can possibly happen to my plants that will happen.
Well, I hope that's given you a new perspective on your brown tips. If you're lucky like me and have access to rainwater, then you can, of course, use that to avoid the fluoride problem. Although, in fact, where I live, I don't think the water is actually fluoridated, which is very handy for us houseplant owners. There's one last issue we need to discuss on the care front for spider plants, and that's dividing the big parent plant. So if your plant has just got too heavy and unwieldy and is full of babies and you don't know what to do, this is when dividing your plant comes in.
You can do root division to spider plant. This is essentially where you take the whole group of spider and then just take a sharp knife and cut it right in half. When you first repot both plants, it will look like you just have two half plants, right? And that's because the plant has not had time to adjust to its new setting of being in its own pot. Give it a good 2 months with the right light and correct watering, then they'll sort of sort themselves out.
Sounds a bit brutal, Daryl. Is there any more gentle way of doing division?
You can gently try and tease them apart, right? Because the spider plant is not just a single, it's usually sold as a group of these, well, they're not really rosettes, but you know what I mean? They all emerge from a single kind of stem and then they come out of a center, right? And there's usually 3 or 4, maybe 5 of these groups in one pot. So you can actually just pull them apart gently.
See, there is a propagation style for every personality. And before Daryl goes, I wanted him to tell me about how he used spider plants at his own wedding.
For my wedding, I obviously wanted to make it plant related. And so what happened was both of our mothers brought a big spider plant that had one baby coming out of it. And they both placed the plant at the front near the altar. What we did was we each cut the babies off of our respective mother plants and then planted together into their own pot.
As we'd say here in the UK, oh, isn't it lovely? Thanks to Daryl for helping us out with some spider plant tips this week. You'll find information about Daryl's book, The New Plant Parent, in the show notes, along with links to his website and Instagram. If you're a regular listener to On the Ledge, you'll know that sometimes topics end up going in quite a different direction than even I had planned. And that's what happened this week when I spoke to Lee Larson. I noticed a post that she'd put on the Facebook group Houseplant Lovers a few months ago, and I'd bookmarked it because it really made me laugh and smile, and I think it's something that you would all relate to. And of course, it includes a spider plant. But it turns out there's quite a backstory to this post. And I'm going to let Lee explain that.
I started this plant journey several years ago. I'm actually in recovery. And when I was not sober and not trying to better my life, I couldn't keep a plant alive. And so I tried to do it one more time after a couple of years in recovery and was like, I'm just gonna see. And it turns out when I'm better, my plants are better. It's weird how the logic on it works. But it becomes a perpetuating cycle, right? Just waking up to a house full of green and life and gives me life. And then it just keeps cycling and perpetuating itself really. And, when I moved to Denver, Colorado, that was my big thing. I wanted house plants, and we got this house, and I posted actually on our Facebook, neighborhood page, I just moved here. I don't know much about gardening or indoor plants. Any help is encouraged. And a nice woman, who turns out has something like 30 or 40 years also in recovery, said, come on by, you can have some plants. And I thought it'd just be like a pot or two. And she gave me trash bags full. And one, she was the spider plant. And she said, you're going to love this one, especially as a new gardener, et cetera, et cetera. Super easy. I said, oh, I don't know. You don't know what I'm capable of. You can, and so I said, okay. And so that actually turns out one of the plants she gave me has been propagating from the desk of Bill W., who is the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. So this has been propagating from the 1930s. There's like legacy there. There's an emotional, sentimental attachment to it. Yeah, that was powerful. We actually cried and hugged in the kitchen. I was like, oh my gosh. And it's actually been beautiful. I recently have started a nonprofit here in Colorado. It's for people recovering from mental health and addiction. And we don't do any medical, we don't do any therapeutic, any legal. We're simply a community space for people to go kind of after get that transition, that gap, I guess, from when you get out of the hospital or jail or rehab or whatever it may be, and you're trying and you don't have a job yet. There's the stability hasn't come. And so we're just a space that's open for 4 hours a day, a very nice space that's open and free to those needing a meal and really seeking community. And one of the first things I put on our nonprofit wish list, I said, we're going to need a lot of houseplants. And my boss said, no, I think we need something like more substantial, like office supplies. And I said, no, we get the houseplants in here. I promise. People walk in and say, oh my gosh, it's so full of life here. And I'm like, I know what I'm talking about. Plants have saved me. I've saved plants. And now it's this whole beautiful thing.
So far, so emotional. And now let's hear the post from Lee.
So I got a bunch of plants and I was building a shelf for them. It's worth noting I name all my plants, tell them how proud of them I am for growing. Again, they all have names. You're just looking so beautiful this morning, Henry. And wow, Margot, look at your legs. Like you're just beautiful and growing. That's my golden pothos. Pretty basic houseplant, crazy person stuff. And I feel you'll understand me. My shelf that I just built collapses, falls and breaks my spider plant, Samson, named for the biblical character who drew his strength from his long hair because spider plants are so long and hairy. He was the first plant I grew from seed to leg to sprouting seed. They're good starter plants, and that one, oh, Jane, that one was my firstborn, my baby. The spider plant pot falls and knocks over the lamp, which falls on my Majesty palm, fiance, named for Her Majesty the Queen Bee, breaking several limbs. I got her a while back, and she was looking pretty rough, and I brought her back to life. I hurt the plant I initially sought to save. So there I am, bawling my eyes out, salt water spewing out of my eyes, all over the spilled soil that I'm covered and laying in, leaves everywhere. My boyfriend, who was working on shelving in the music therapy room across the house, runs in to see me sobbing like a dramatic 1940s film star in the evidence of the unintentional slaughter. I'm sorry, Samson. Please forgive me, Beyonce. I have failed you. I love you both so much. Please forgive me. Puffy eyes, snot down the face. This episode went on for a good 15 minutes. Oh, the shame, the despair, the humanity. He hugs me and rubs my back and affirms the plants knew it wasn't intentional, and he helped me pick it all back up, putting all the soil in the pods, collecting the leaves. He even had the heart to go along with it when I argued, but wouldn't putting the broken leaves back into the soil to fertilize the plants be the same as forcing someone to live with a corpse? No, honey. That's probably good closure for the plants, and that they would want to be near their loved ones in life and death. Plus, it's good for the soil. Man, I could not wait to hear my therapist's take on this. Between her and my boyfriend, they understand. And that's why we have these houseplant communities of people who understand the drama and the attachment, the healing. They really are become our babies, our extensions of ourselves. And this little episode really proves that sentimental value we attach to them and how much we care.
Well, I hope you enjoyed listening to that as much as I did, and thank you, Lee. If you're interested in Lee's project, it's called Recovery Cafe Longmont, and you can find it online at recoverycafelongmont.org. I'll put that link in the show notes. Right, it's time for Question of the Week. Cecile got in touch about her Begonia luxurians. Yes, that's the palm leaf begonia. I may have mentioned it a few times on the show before because, yes, I'm a little bit obsessed, and I know some of you are too. Over on the Facebook group this week, listener Bobby was celebrating because his Begonia luxurians is flowering. And no, Bobby, I'm not at all bitter that mine hasn't flowered. Anyway, so Cecile has emailed with a query about her very spindly looking Begonia luxurians, and she had done as I did last year and bought a plug of this plant from Dibley's, the North Wales nursery, but she's had some difficulties with it. The central stem is weak and the plant doesn't seem to be able to keep itself upright, and she's wondering if this is characteristic of a young plant or whether there's a problem, and she wants suggestions for how to strengthen it. There's a few things you can do on this front with a plant like this. It is fair to say that my Begonia luxurians did need a little cane stuck in the side to support it when it was younger, because they can be a bit spindly at first until they get bigger, and then they do become rather meaty. It could be that the plant needs a bit more light. Certainly these begonias don't like being in a dark corner, and they are quite happy being outside in the summer where they get more light, but obviously not in the baking direct sun at midday. So I suggest to Cecile that she moves it a bit closer to a window and see if that helps. The other thing that is worth trying is removing apical dominance. What in the haystacks is that? Well, if you listen to my episode with Leslie Hallock on the science of plant propagation, you may remember that this means that the plant is putting all its energy into that main stem and the growth there, rather than putting energy into making side shoots that bush the plant out. So if you take out the apical bud or the growing point on a plant, then it will then remove apical dominance and allow those lateral shoots to develop. And this was what will happen in a Begonia luxurians. It certainly has happened in mine, where I've taken out the main stem and it's produced lots of shoots from the side and also from the bottom. Treating this one like a tomato, as I've said before, is helpful, and it really does need regular feeding once a week at least during the growing season, and that way you'll make sure you get a nice meaty plant. But it does take a while to bulk up, that's what I will say about it, so don't give up hope, Cecile, and keep me posted on how your plant is doing. If you've got a question for On The Ledge Podcast, do drop me a line on theledgepodcast@gmail.com, and you'll get a reply either from me or from my editorial helper, Kelly Westlake, and I'll do my best to get back to you as soon as possible with an answer, whether or not it features in the show. As you can imagine, I do get a lot of emails these days, so please bear with me and feel free to give me a nudge if I haven't answered a question that you've sent in. And finally, before I go, a little Nicodemia diversifolia update. Thanks to those of you who got in touch after my discussion of this plant in episode 99 with Lisa Eldred-Seinkoff. Scott Zona, who has featured on the show himself, talking about palms, got in touch to say that he once encountered this plant as a landscape plant in South Florida. It was in an old garden and probably had been there since the 50s. It must have fallen seriously out of fashion, because in all my times looking at cultivated plants in South Florida, I saw it only in that one garden. So that's interesting. Somebody else got in touch to say that the correct botanical Latin name for this plant is actually Buddleia indica, which is most interesting. And I did find a website called budleacollection.com, which explained that this plant is rare in cultivation and commonly called the indoor oak, and its native home is in the Mascarene Islands, Comoro and Madagascar. I did see some pictures of this plant on the toptropicals.com website, and you can see why it's called the indoor oak, because the leaves are a little bit oak-like. And according to the RHS Plant Finder website, there are 2 nurseries in the UK that sell this plant: the Lavender Garden in Gloucestershire and Longstock Park Nursery in Hampshire. So I might check those out and see if they actually do sell those plants. If anyone has any more information about this not so mystery plant, then please do get in touch, because I'd still like to know any other tidbits that you have. That wraps up this week's show. I'll be back next Friday, but until then, keep the aspidistra flying. Bye! The music you heard in this week's episode was Roll Jordan Roll by the Joy Drops, The Encouragement Stick by Dr. Turtle, and Overthrown by Josh Woodward. The advertising music was by the Heftone Banjo Orchestra with Whistling Rufus and Dill Pickles. All the music in the show is licensed under Creative Commons. See janeperrone.com for details.